Surviving human conversations.
Hello, welcome back to Human Conversations. This is Chelze and with my co-host,
Melanie.
Today we are here to talk about a fairly sensitive topic, and I wanted to disclaim before we start because one thing that, if you've been listening and following along with us, something that's important to us is the way we language and our words and the way we make meaning of these words. So today we wanted to talk about the umbrella term that was formerly known as codependency. And the disclaimer that I wanted to add, because I think it's important, is that we're not going to be using the word codependency. And Melanie actually came up with something that I really, really like that we're going to talk about. And the reason in the field, this term has become very pathologizing, and even more so pathologizing to folks who identify as more femme women. And so we want to make sure that our language in this episode is more congruent to the depiction of what this dynamic and creation of a role actually looks like and the function that it serves for a human being. So with that being said, Melanie, you want to share the term that you talked about and we'll use?
Yes. So in considering, language and such, really when I think about what the word codependency actually means, it's really more about relational survival, how people survive in relationships, essentially, and survive and maintain relationships. So a lot of the times, some of these behaviors that we consider to be not typical of maybe dynamics that are common in relationships, they occur because of potentially past trauma or just past abusive relationships from parents, or just being around really, maybe they weren't abusive to you necessarily, but there've been a lot of fighting or a lot of discomfort, and maybe a lot of neglect. So a lot of needs, essentially a lot of needs are not being met when you're a child potentially. And so what happens is as you get older, you still have those needs, still need those needs met. And so you learn how to develop relationships with people, and some of those kind of behaviors or traits that you develop might be things that develop in a way to survive in relationship with people. The things you learn to do that will maintain a relationship, which will continue to maintain to get your needs met, emotional needs, physical needs, safety needs, different things like that. And for example, if a child has been, let's just say, abused maybe neglected from their parents, when they get older, they're going to want to still be in relation with people. We are very relational. We even though we might fear relationships, we still crave them and still crave the closeness of being in one. So when that person, let's just say, grows up and wants to be in a relationship with somebody, if they find somebody who is safe, if they find someone who they feel like really connected with and feel completely different possibly than how they felt as a child in relation with people, they're going to want to hold on to that. Their needs have been neglected for many years and now they're getting met. So they're going to really want to just soak in all of that attention and love and closeness, where they're not going to want to lose that easily. They're going to probably be really anxious about losing that connection. And so they're going to do behaviors that are going to try to maintain that relationship, maintain that way of getting their needs met. And so that's when this kind of term developed, I think, a little more, as people started seeing, people as in therapists, I guess, and scientists or whatever, started seeing people who would do a lot of things to maintain relationships that might have hurt actually the person trying to actually maintain the relationship in their attempt to maintain it.
And I think it's important to note this term codependency was birthed out of in the mental health field, out of the substance misuse population. They noticed a lot of the dynamics between partners, and when someone was using, and what the partner would do to either help the situation, help the partner, whatever the case may be. This is where that term was kind of birthed. So it is, there's history to the term, and it has been very much kind of been debunked in terms of the pathology towards women and how it's been discriminatory in some ways, because the dynamics that they often were looking at and observing were, cisgender male female relationships. So
Yes, that's important to note too.
And I think what's important to note as well, along with that, is that a lot of these characteristics and traits, people may also identify as being an empath, highly sensitive person, or a people pleaser. Like having that, Oprah calls it the disease to please, which I also really don't like that term, because I think wanting to care for someone isn't a disease, but it can, when it's exacerbated, I think is more of what she meant. But so I want to our intention is to really validate this experience of what this is like, in order to see the other side of this, umbrella term, because that's the most important side, is what it actually is, what the behaviors are serving, and where it comes from, and the birth of it, and the history of it, and all those things.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't know that people pleasing is actually could be a trauma reaction, or could be essentially like a learned behavior in some ways, that's been molded by your relationships with other people when you were younger. So, for example, usually people think flight, like to run away from, if there's something scary is coming, they run away, or they fight it. If something's coming at them, they fight, or they might freeze. That's another trauma reaction. And that's when a lot of times people will dissociate, disconnect from their body, disconnect emotionally. But then there's people pleasing. And that one really is, people don't recognize they go into that behavior a lot of the time. But people pleasing, especially when we think about substance use, the way it's used is to help maintain the environment in a kind of a safe sense of like energy. They, a lot of times when a partner may be using or misusing to an extreme, the other partner kind of knows their cycles. People start to get into these cycles of use, right? And the other partner knows, and they can feel the tension building up, and so they know what they, from their pattern of behavior, they've learned, like, oh, I don't want to set this person off, because I know that then something scary might happen. They might get angry, they might be yelling or whatever. So they then will do these behaviors to try to please or maintain kind of this more neutral or calm or happy environment. And so that's when the term like people pleasing comes in, because they're trying to essentially keep their partner content, or happy. And they're trying, in some ways, they're trying to feel like they might be able to somehow control how their partner feels.
Right, fix it. Along with what you're saying too, with when it comes to that dissociation, when we have that anxious or obsessive or overthinking, overfunctioning, ruminating process, that is actually an emotional defense, which can manifest because of a variety of reasons, but mostly is because our childhood in some ways was dysfunctional, depending on who were your caregivers and who's around in your environment. But being in our heads, thinking, fantasizing, ruminating, that is also a defense that we adapt in childhood to help us dissociate. So leaning into the dissociation from the emotional pain that we were experiencing. So it is dysfunctional because it keeps us focused on the future or the past, where we miss out on being alive today. So then it just keeps perpetuating in this cycle, which ultimately ends up we kind of feel, we don't feel good, because we keep running up against those same feelings in an attempt to escape it. But actually we're just repeating the cycle. So that's why it's so important, when we talk about these things, to really shed light and paint a picture on where, you know, all that entails this type of dynamic of when we overthink or ruminate, what that process is actually doing for us, you know?
Yeah, and I know we've been talking a lot about childhood, but you know, the people pleasing could be developed at any point. It's about the relationship you're in with someone. If you know, if as an adult, perhaps you get into a relationship where there might be some domestic violence or some emotional abuse, well, physical domestic violence or emotional abuse going on, and that can be emotional abuse can be very subtle. Sometimes you don't recognize that it's happening when you're in it. So if you're in a relationship like that for maybe, you know, considerable amount of time, and then that relationship ends, and then you get into another relationship, you may have developed people pleasing tendencies from that relationship, which may now show up in another relationship, and you may have never had those types of tendencies before that one relationship.
Right.
But additionally, sometimes we go into relational survival in some relationships and not necessarily others. And it's good to be really self-aware if you're recognizing that you may be acting differently in relation with maybe one particular person, but not with other people. So there may be maybe some fear or anxiety about that relationship being lost, or you know, there may be something about that relationship to explore. If you're trying to hold on to something so much, you know, that says something, right?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of provoking or speaking to those parts in you that maybe either were already there or have developed over time because of certain circumstances. I think we also wanted to just shed some light on the cultural aspect of this umbrella term that we're kind of relanguaging as relational
Survival.
Thank you. Because we were talking about how before this, the difference between collectivist and individualistic cultures, or just in cultures in general, right?
And like this term was created in America, and like we had mentioned, by well, it's by a male you know, in the mental health field, probably psychiatrist actually, and the term really has to do with a lot of focus on like the American perspective of what it is to be like an individual, and how individuals should have relationships, right? That's how the American perspective kind of looks at relationships, like individuals in relationships, right? But a lot of other cultures, collectivist cultures, you know, for example, look at relationships so much differently, really consider all the ways we are connected and how we do rely on one another, and embrace that feeling of like how we really do count on each other, and our connection with one another is really important and is necessary and vital for our for us to flourish and thrive. So this term, if looked at from an American perspective, but to a family that is, or a person that's from a different culture, they may characterize that person's from the other culture's relationship as codependent, but that may not in fact be true, because it's not actually the same. Like the way we look at a relationship and categorize them is differently, right?
Right. So it might be showing up congruent to the culture, but different in maybe to someone else's culture.
Yes.
I wanted to go back a little bit too. So with this term codependency, I actually looked it up because I wanted to be clear who developed this term. So in 1986, Timon Cermak, who is an MD, so a doctor, he wrote Diagnosing and Treating Codependence, a guide for professionals. But the person who actually popularized the concept of codependency, so really got it out there, was the Melody Beatty, I don't know how to say her last name. codependent no more, which I know a lot of people in the mental health field have probably heard of. But so it was kind of developed by two big leading people in the field in terms of this codependency term, and then popularized. And that, to me, that's interesting, but also very telling, because I think sometimes as women, we've been put in a situation due to the system that we live in here in the United States, where we even have to use terms to be able to attempt to normalize or attempt to be understood. And so we even, like, I wonder what that dynamic was in 1986 for, for people to put language to these things, and it probably felt really normalizing,
Well, I mean, yeah, just speaking about like how the term so women were not given the same level of privilege, right, as men. Right. So a lot of women back in the day, I'll just say, were very dependent on men financially, and in order for them to again have this relational survival, they had to, in some ways, like, they were dependent on the relationship. Like if it ended, that meant they would be like financially maybe like there would be a lot of damage done if they didn't maintain the relationship, right? They'd lose potentially their children, because men got children custody rights over women until fairly recently. So they had a lot more to lose. So in some ways, women needed to have more of a mindset of relational survival in order for them to be okay physically, have their physical needs met as well. Mm-hmm. So this, like, in some ways, the society kind of shaped women to act in some ways with these kind of codependent or relational survival behaviors, in order for them to get their basic needs met. And then when you talk about the second book, right, codependency no more, there's a bit of shift, right, in how women empowerment and more opportunities for women in professional development and such. And so the shift even in the names of the books, right, was very apparent and like clear that women are learning. We're trying to normalize essentially like women taking back their power by calling it like, oh, we're no longer going to be codependent. Does that make sense?
Right, exactly. And that's why I think it was important for us to frame the conversation in this way of relational surviving, because this all of our tendencies and our traits and our behaviors, they're all serving a function, not just for us, but for us to in our future self, and it's setting up our so to speak safety around us, even though we might think it's helpful. It really, sometimes in the end it's not, but in a sense it's congruent to how we're trying to get our needs met. So there's like a reason to all of these things. It's not just people don't just do this just because.
Right. Kind of like what I was saying, like people I was talking about, like, back then women still do this now, because we still are in a lot of ways like trying to survive in relationships because of the same factors that plagued us 50 years ago. It's some of women are still we're still experiencing this, and in addition to the other reasons I talked about, like trauma and coming from a family where there might have been substance use, like all of these other factors that we talk about go into it and potentially could cause people to go more into relational survival. But some of these other things that I talk about are also still happening today too, for reasons why people are doing relational survival.
Right. And I think one of the things that we, having that term, what it missed using codependency is the beautiful part of how much resiliency and how many social skills and relational skills you developed having these traits and these behaviors and ways of looking at things. Because when you look at what's inside of it, you see traits like being a giver and being able to listen, being able to pick up on nonverbals, you know, knowing what's in your environment, becoming very sensitive to someone's tone of voice or their feelings, their emotions, what's behind their words. And they're able to soothe that for other people because they've been so accustomed to these dynamics. And so it's so beautiful when you look at what this experience has brought to a person. And I think where it gets exacerbated is how culture can kind of really pick these things up and take advantage of some of those really kind and supportive traits, you know. And then we, like you said, it really goes back to that whole concept of how women have been represented in culture and our society, and then it becomes exacerbated for some people, right? We tend to start to get in the way of our own self because we fall so quickly into those dynamics.
Yeah, but people with these types of maybe more behaviors who are in relationship survival generally are going to be really caring, giving partners. You know, they're going to try to get all they're going to really focus on their other partner's needs being met, actually, a lot of the time. And that's going to be probably their focus. And they're not going to be afraid to usually show their affection and like show how important that person is to them in their life.
Right. Very, very courageous and vulnerable. It's a, yeah.
Right.
Well, I think this is a good place to leave this conversation. If you have any thoughts, feel free to reach out and let us know what you think. And we will be having our final episode of this season 2 coming up next. Thank you for staying with us, and we wish you all calm and peace as you navigate through the holidays. And
yes.
Yeah, so see you next time.
Having you